How does a man go from cleaning up spills in a warehouse to firing the CEO in front of 500 people? It started with a $99 DNA test I took as a joke. I thought I was just finding out my ethnicity, but I ended up finding out that the people who had treated me like garbage for 10 years were actually stealing my birthright. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Arthur Penhaligon. I'm 35 years old, and for the last 10 years, I've been invisible. I don't mean that in a supernatural way. I'm a maintenance supervisor at Vanguard Logistics, one of the largest shipping and distribution companies in North America. I wear a gray uniform that blends in with the concrete floors. I fix conveyor belts, unclog hydraulic lifts, and wipe up oil spills. To the executives who walk the catwalks in their $3,000 suits, I'm not a person. I'm just part of the machinery, and a cheap part at that. They think I'm slow. They think I'm simple because I keep my head down and do my job without complaining. What they don't know is that silence isn't the same thing as stupidity. Silence is how you survive when you have nobody in your corner. I was found in a basket on the steps of a fire station in Chicago 3 decades ago. No note, no name, no history. I spent my childhood bouncing between foster homes, some good, most bad. I learned early on that if you make noise, you get moved. If you complain, you get moved. If you want to stay in one place long enough to finish a school year, you make yourself useful and you make yourself invisible. That strategy got me through high school and into a steady job. It didn't get me a family or a legacy or a fortune. It just got me a studio apartment in the bad part of town and a job where I'm treated like furniture. But the person who treats me worse than furniture is Julian Vanguard. Julian is 32 years old. He's the acting CEO of Vanguard Logistics. His father, Silas Vanguard, the billionaire founder of the company, died 3 months ago from a sudden heart attack. Since then, Julian has been strutting around the warehouse like a king waiting for his coronation. He's the kind of man who thinks loud is the same thing as smart. He wears Italian loafers on a warehouse floor and fires people because he doesn't like the way they look at him. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the main sorting line jammed. This is the heart of the facility, a massive, high-speed system that routes thousands of packages an hour. When it stops, the company loses about $10,000 a minute. I was already running toward the control panel when I saw Julian standing there with his entourage of consultants, mostly college buddies he'd hired to stand around and agree with him. "Why is it stopping?" Julian was screaming, his face turning red. "Override it. We have quotas to hit." "Sir, don't," I called out, my voice calm but loud enough to carry over the sirens. "It's a sensor fault. If you force the override, the motor will burn out." Julian turned to look at me. He looked at my grease-stained name tag, then at my face. He sneered. "I didn't ask for an opinion from the janitor," he spat. He turned to the nervous system operator. "I gave you a direct order. Override the safety. Push the throughput to 110%. The operator looked at me, terrified. Then he looked at Julian. He valued his paycheck, so he pressed the button. The machine groaned. It was a deep, mechanical scream of metal grinding on metal. For about 10 seconds, the belt moved faster. Julian smiled, turning to his friends. "See? You just have to show these machines who's boss. Efficiency is a mindset." Then came the snap. A drive chain the size of a motorcycle tire snapped under the tension. It whipped through the casing with a sound like a gunshot. Smoke billowed out instantly. The emergency brakes slammed into place, and the entire facility went dead silent. $10,000 a minute just became $0 a minute. The line was dead. Julian stared at the smoke, his mouth open. He looked around, realizing everyone was watching him. He needed a scapegoat, and he needed one fast. His eyes locked on me. "You," he pointed a manicured finger at my chest, "you didn't maintain the tensioners. I told you last week to check the torque on these drives." He hadn't spoken to me in 6 months. "The tensioners were fine, Mr. Vanguard," I said, keeping my voice level. "You overrode the safety limit. The chain couldn't handle the torque spike." Julian walked up to me. He was shorter than me, but he stood on his toes to get in my face. He smelled like expensive cologne and fear. "Are you calling me a liar?" he hissed. "I'm stating the mechanical facts," I said. "Listen to me, you warehouse rat," he said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. The interns giggled nervously. "You're incompetent. You're lucky I don't fire you on the spot for negligence. Now clean this mess up, and don't clock out until this line is running, even if it takes all night. I'm not paying you overtime for your own screw-up." He turned on his heel and marched away, his entourage trailing behind him like ducklings. Warehouse rat. It wasn't the worst thing he'd called me, but something about the way he said it today, So casual, so sure of his superiority, stuck in my chest like a splinter. I spent the next 9 hours replacing the drive chain. My hands were bleeding by the time I finished. It was 11 p.m. when I finally washed the grease off my arms in the break room sink. Sarah was there. She's a junior actuary, one of the number crunchers from the 3rd floor. She's about 28, with glasses and a messy bun, and she's the only person in the corporate office who knows my name. "I heard what happened," she said softly, pouring herself a coffee. "Everyone knows it was his fault, Arthur. The logs show the manual override." "Doesn't matter what the logs show," I said, drying my hands with a rough paper towel. "His name is on the building. Mine is just on a name tag." "It's not right," she said. She looked at me with genuine pity, which almost hurt more than Julian's anger. "Oh, I almost forgot. The Secret Santa exchange. You weren't at the party yesterday." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a small, rectangular box wrapped in shiny red paper. "I drew your name," she smiled. "It's not much. Just something I thought was interesting." I took the box. "Thanks, Sarah. You didn't have to." I drove home to my studio apartment. It's a small box in a concrete building, but it's clean. I like things clean. It's the one place in the world I can control. I sat on the edge of my bed and unwrapped the gift. It was a DNA ancestry kit. "Find your roots," the box promised. "Discover where you come from." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound in the empty room. "Where I come from," I muttered to myself. "I come from a basket on a concrete step." I almost threw it in the trash. What was the point? Knowing I was 10% Irish or 20% German wouldn't change the fact that I was alone. It wouldn't fix the drive chain. It wouldn't make Julian Vanguard respect me. But then I thought about Julian calling me a rat, a creature with no pedigree, no history, just a pest to be tolerated until it becomes inconvenient. "Maybe I'm related to royalty," I joked to the empty room. "Maybe I'm the lost heir to a European throne and I can quit this job." I opened the kit. I spat into the little plastic tube. I sealed it in the biohazard bag, registered the barcode on the app, and tossed it in the mail pile. I forgot about it the next day. 3 weeks went by. The warehouse returned to its grinding routine. Julian continued his reign of terror. He fired the shift manager because the coffee in the conference room was cold. He cut the break times by 5 minutes to boost productivity. And he announced the Succession Gala. It was going to be the event of the decade. A massive black tie party at the Grand Hotel where Julian would officially assume the title of CEO and chairman of the board. The invites were sent out to the city's elite. I obviously wasn't invited, but I was told I would be working. "We need manpower to load the equipment," the operations manager told me. "Julian wants the company ice sculptures brought in by our own trucks. You're driving." So, on top of my maintenance duties, I was now a delivery driver for a party celebrating the man who made my life miserable. It was a Thursday night. I was exhausted. I'd spent the day fixing a hydraulic lift that had been leaking fluid for a week because Julian refused to authorize the budget for new seals. I went home, showered the smell of hydraulic fluid off my skin, and collapsed into bed. My phone was charging on the nightstand. I drifted off to sleep thinking about invoices and conveyor belts. At 2:15 a.m., my phone vibrated. It wasn't a call. It was a single long buzz of a notification. I groggily rolled over and tapped the screen. The brightness blinded me for a second. It was an email from the DNA testing company. Subject: "Your results are ready." I rubbed my eyes. I almost went back to sleep. But curiosity is a funny thing. It wakes you up faster than caffeine. I unlocked the phone and opened the app. A spinning wheel loaded for a few seconds. Then a colorful chart appeared. Ethnicity estimate: 50% British Isles, 40% Scandinavian, 10% Eastern European. "Okay," I whispered, yawning. "I'm a Viking. Good to know." I started to close the app, but then I saw a red badge on the bottom of the screen. Under the tab labeled DNA Matches, it said One New Match. I tapped it. Usually these things show you a third cousin or a distant aunt, someone you've never heard of. The screen loaded. At the very top of the list, there was a match. The text was bold. Relationship: parent. Name: Silas Vanguard. Status: the deceased. Shared DNA: 49.9%. Confidence: extremely high. I froze. I stared at the name. Silas Vanguard, the billionaire founder of the company I worked for. The man whose face was painted on a mural in the lobby. The man who had died 3 months ago. The father of Julian Vanguard. My phone slipped out of my hand and hit the floor with a thud. I didn't pick it up. I just sat there in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't a warehouse rat. I was a Vanguard. I called in sick the next morning. It was the first time in 7 years. When I called the automated line, I felt a strange sense of vertigo. Usually, the fear of losing a day's pay would knot my stomach. I lived paycheck to paycheck. A missed shift meant ramen for a week instead of real food. But staring at the screenshot on my phone, shared DNA, 49.9%, the fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, vibrating numbness. I didn't spend the day sleeping. I spent it at the library, researching. Silas Vanguard was a titan. He started with one truck and built an empire that moved goods across 3 continents. The obituaries described him as tough but fair, a man who valued hard work above all else. He had married twice. His first wife died young, no children recorded. His second wife was Elena Vanguard, a socialite from old money. They had one son, Julian. I looked at the timeline. I was born 3 years before he married Elena. The obituaries also mentioned his executor, Archibald Sterling of Sterling and Associates. I put on my only suit, a charcoal polyester blend I'd bought for a funeral 5 years ago, and took the bus downtown. The Sterling and Associates building was a glass needle piercing the sky. The lobby smelled like white tea and money. When I approached the receptionist, she looked at my cheap suit and scuffed shoes with a polite, practiced dismissal. "Mr. Sterling is fully booked for the next 3 months," she said, her hand hovering over a button that probably called security. "Tell him it's about the Vanguard estate," I said. My voice sounded deeper than usual, steadier. "Tell him I have information about the Chicago file." I didn't know if a Chicago file existed. I just knew I was found in Chicago. It was a gamble. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. She whispered something, listened, and her eyes widened. She hung up and looked at me differently. "Mr. Sterling will see you now. Top floor." The elevator ride made my ears pop. When the doors opened, an older man was waiting for me. He was in his 60s, wearing a 3-piece suit that cost more than my entire life's earnings. He had steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they could read fine print in the dark. "Mr. Sterling?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me. He looked at my hairline, my jaw, my hands. He took a shaky breath. "My God," he whispered. "You have his walk." He ushered me into his office, a room lined with mahogany bookshelves and overlooking the entire city. He didn't sit behind his massive desk. He sat in a leather armchair across from me, leaning forward. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Arthur Penhaligon," I said. I pulled out my phone and opened the app. "And according to this, I'm Silas Vanguard's son." Sterling looked at the screen for a long time. He didn't question the technology. He didn't call security. He just slumped back in his chair, looking suddenly very old. "We looked for you," he said softly. "For 15 years we looked." The words hit me harder than the DNA test. "You knew?" "Silas knew he had a son," Sterling said. "He had a relationship before Elena, a woman named Mary. She struggled with addiction. She vanished before you were born. Silas spent millions trying to find her, trying to find you. He wanted to raise you. He wanted an heir who understood the value of building something, not just inheriting it." "So why didn't he find me?" I asked. "I was in the system. I wasn't hiding." Sterling stood up and walked to a wall safe behind his desk. He spun the dial with practiced precision. "Because someone made sure we stopped looking." He pulled out a file folder and slid it across the coffee table. It was yellowed with age. "When you were 20 years old, we finally got a lead," Sterling explained. "We traced you to a foster agency in Chicago. Silas was ready to get on a plane. He was going to bring you home." I opened the folder. Inside was a single document, a death certificate. Name, Arthur Penhaligon. Date of death, November 14th, 2008. Cause, automobile accident. "I don't understand," I said, my hands shaking. "I've never been in a car accident." "It's a forgery," Sterling said. His voice was hard now, filled with a lawyer's controlled rage. "A very expensive, very high-quality forgery. It was mailed to Silas anonymously just days before he planned to make contact. It broke him, Arthur. He stopped looking. He resigned himself to the fact that Julian was his only legacy." "Who sent it?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "We couldn't prove it then," Sterling said, but the return address on the envelope was a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, a box registered to a shell company owned by a trust. He looked me in the eye. "The beneficiary of that trust is Elena Vanguard." I felt the air leave the room. Elena, the woman who walked through the warehouse like she was afraid the floor would dirty her shoes. Julian's mother. She hadn't just protected her son's inheritance, she had erased my existence. She had looked at a father searching for his lost boy and decided it was cheaper to kill the boy on paper. She stole my life, I said. It wasn't a question. She stole everything, Sterling agreed. Silas died thinking his first son was gone. That's why he left the company to Julian, or rather, why he didn't write Julian out. Sterling reached into the safe again. This time he pulled out a heavy, rusted iron key. It looked like something from a different century. Silas was a cautious man. He never fully trusted Elena, especially toward the end. He kept a private vault, a personal archive that wasn't part of the corporate estate. He gave me this key a week before he died. He said, "Archie, if by some miracle the boy isn't dead, give him this. If he is dead, melt it down." I took the key. It was cold and heavy in my palm. "What's in the vault?" "Leverage," Sterling said, "the kind that changes who sits in the CEO's chair." He leaned in close. "Arthur, listen to me carefully. You are the rightful heir, but right now you are vulnerable. Elena and Julian have billions of dollars and an army of lawyers. If they find out who you are before we are ready, they will bury you in litigation for 20 years. Or worse. So what do I do?" "You go back to work," Sterling said. "We need to file an assertion of heirship, but we need to do it at the exact right moment to freeze their assets. The succession gala is in 3 days. That is when Julian officially takes control. That is when the board signs off on the transfer." "You want me to wait until the gala?" "I want you to walk into that warehouse tomorrow and be the invisible man for 2 more days," Sterling said. "Let them think they've won. Let Julian believe he is a king. And while he's busy polishing his crown, you and I are going to build a guillotine." Leaving that office felt like waking up from a coma. The world looked different. The cars on the street weren't just traffic. They were logistics variables. The buildings weren't just concrete. They were assets. I went back to my apartment, but it felt like a stranger's room. I looked at my scuffed work boots by the door. I looked at the grease under my fingernails. I wasn't just Arthur the maintenance guy anymore. I was the man who was going to take it all back. The next morning, I swiped my badge at the warehouse turnstile at 6:55 a.m. The beep sounded the same as it always did, but the noise of the facility hit me differently. The roar of the conveyor belts wasn't just noise, it was the sound of my father's legacy. The smell of diesel and cardboard was the smell of the empire he built, and Julian was destroying it. I saw the backlog on line 4 immediately. A sensor was misaligned. 2 days ago, I would have rushed to fix it to avoid being yelled at. Today, I walked over calmly, pulled a wrench from my belt, and adjusted it with 3 turns. The line smoothed out instantly. "Penhaligon!" The voice cut through the air. I didn't flinch. I turned slowly. Julian was standing on the catwalk above me, looking down through the metal grating. He was wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my car. "Get up to my office," he shouted. "Now." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked up the metal stairs. The glass office overlooked the entire floor, a fishbowl designed to make the workers feel watched. When I walked in, Julian didn't look up from his phone. He let me stand there for a full minute, a power move. "You weren't here yesterday," he said finally, still scrolling. "I was sick," I said. "Sick." He laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "You don't get sick, Arthur. Machines don't get sick. They break or they work." He swiveled his chair around to face me. His eyes were watery and bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept, or like he'd been celebrating too hard. "I had to hire a contractor to clear a jam on the loading dock yesterday because you weren't here," Julian lied. "I knew the loading dock systems were fine. I checked the logs every morning. That cost me $500. "I have sick leave accrued," I said. "HR policy states—" "I don't care about HR policy." Julian slammed his hand on the desk. "I care about my company running smoothly before the gala. My mother is breathing down my neck. The board is watching, and I have a maintenance supervisor who thinks he can take a spa day." He picked up a piece of paper and scribbled on it. "This is a formal write-up. 1 more strike, and you're out. Actually—" He paused, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked so much like the photos of Silas, but without any of the strength. Just a hollow copy. "You know what? Don't worry about the strike," Julian said softly. "Enjoy the next few days, Arthur. Really soak it in." "Sir?" "After the gala on Friday, things are going to change around here," he said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I'm announcing a restructuring. Cutting the fat, the consultants call it. Modernizing." He stood up and walked to the glass, looking out over the hundreds of workers below. "I'm replacing this entire maintenance department with an external contractor. Cheaper, less complaining." He turned back to me, grinning. "You're first on the list, Rat." Come Monday morning, your badge won't work. So fix whatever needs fixing, keep my floor running for my party, and then get out of my sight." He waved his hand dismissively, like shooing a fly. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had lived my life, spent my money, and enjoyed the father I never got to meet. I felt the heavy iron key in my pocket pressing against my leg. "Understood," I said. I walked out of the office. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel shame. I walked back down to the floor, picked up my wrench, and went back to work. Julian thought he was firing a janitor. He had no idea he had just threatened the owner of the building. The address Mr. Sterling gave me led to a nondescript building in the financial district. There was no sign, just a heavy steel door, and a buzzer next to a camera lens that looked like it belonged on a tank. I pressed the buzzer. "Name?" A voice crackled. It sounded synthetic. "Arthur Penhaligon," I said. "I have the iron key." There was a pause, followed by the heavy clack of magnetic locks disengaging. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of recycled oxygen and ozone. A security guard sat behind bulletproof glass. He didn't look like the rent-a-cops we had at the warehouse. He looked like ex-military. He checked my ID, scanned the heavy iron key with a laser device, and then nodded. "Level B4, he said. "Vault 77. You have 1 hour." The elevator ride down was silent. When the doors opened, I was in a corridor lined with stainless steel deposit boxes. But Vault 77 wasn't a small box. It was a walk-in room. I inserted the rusted iron key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, heavy resistance. I pushed the door open. The lights flickered on automatically. It was a small room, maybe 10 by 10. On the shelves to my left were stacks of gold bars. I'd never seen real gold before. It has a specific luster, a heaviness that absorbs the light rather than reflecting it. There must have been $5 million in bullion sitting there, gathering dust. But Sterling had told me the gold wasn't the point. On a metal table in the center of the room sat a gray steel lockbox. I walked past the gold without touching it. I sat at the table and opened the box. It wasn't locked. Inside, there were 3 leather-bound journals and a thick envelope sealed with red wax. I picked up the first journal. The leather was worn, the pages dog-eared. I opened it to a random page. The handwriting was sharp, jagged, the writing of a man who thought faster than his hand could move. June 12, 1998. The business is growing, but the house feels empty. Elena buys things to fill the silence. Vases, paintings, rugs. She thinks legacy is what you buy. She doesn't understand that legacy is blood. I turned the pages, my heart thumping in my throat. I was looking for me. I found the entry near the back of the second journal. The date matched the death certificate Sterling had shown me. November 14th, 2008. Elena came to me in the study tonight. She was crying. She handed me a letter from the Chicago PD. She said the investigators found him. She said my boy is gone. A car wreck on I-90. She says there's a body. I don't believe her. I looked in her eyes when she told me. There was no grief there, only relief. She thinks the threat to Julian is gone. She thinks I will stop looking now. I will let her believe that. If I keep pushing, she might do something worse than lie. I will secure the assets. I will hide the truth in this vault. If the boy is out there, if he survived whatever she did or didn't do, he will find this. And if he finds this, he gets it all. I had to put the book down. My hands were shaking too hard to hold it. He knew. He didn't know for sure. But he suspected. He hadn't abandoned me. He had gone underground to protect me from her. I picked up the wax-sealed envelope. On the front, in that same jagged script, it read, "Last Will and Testament of Silas Vanguard." Unredacted. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Sterling had told me what was inside. This was the nuclear option, the document that revoked all previous wills and named Arthur Penhaligon the sole beneficiary of the Vanguard estate, effective immediately upon proof of life. I put the journals and the envelope into my backpack. I left the gold bars where they were. I didn't need his money yet. I needed his words. I walked out of the vault feeling heavier but stronger. The uncertainty that had plagued me my whole life, the question of why didn't they want me, was gone. He did want me. Now I just had to survive the next 48 hours. I returned to the warehouse for the afternoon shift. The transition from the silent, cool vault to the screaming noise of the distribution center was jarring. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of diesel exhaust from the forklifts. The succession gala was tomorrow night, and the facility was in chaos. Julian had decided that the warehouse floor needed to be part of the aesthetic. He wanted the investors to see the scale of the operation while they drank their champagne. So, he ordered a section of the active floor cleared and draped in black velvet. I was tightening a bolt on the main sorter when I heard him. "You!" Rat! I closed my eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and turned around. Julian was standing near the loading bay, wearing a hard hat that looked ridiculous on him. It was pristine white, never touched by work. He was pointing at a pallet of boxes. Yes, Mr. Vanguard? The caterers are incompetent, he snapped. They dropped a pallet of the vintage Dom Perignon at the receiving dock. I need the backup supply moved to the VIP staging area, now. That's not maintenance, sir, I said calmly. That's logistics. You have loaders for that. The loaders are busy hanging the velvet curtains, Julian screamed. His face was flushed. The stress of the upcoming gala was cracking his composure. I am giving you an order. Move the champagne. Or do you want that termination letter right now? He held all the cards. Or he thought he did. If I got fired today, I'd lose my access badge. If I lost my access badge, I couldn't get into the gala tomorrow to meet Sterling. I put my wrench away. I'll move it, I said. Good, Julian sneered. And be careful. 1 bottle of that costs more than your car. For the next 2 hours, I hauled crates of champagne. Physical labor wasn't new to me, but this was different. This was punitive. Julian stood on the catwalk with his phone, likely texting his friends, occasionally glancing down to make sure I was sweating. My coworkers, guys I'd eaten lunch with for years, looked away. They were ashamed for me. They saw a man being broken. I picked up a crate marked Vanguard Private Reserve. It was heavy. As I walked across the floor, my boots squeaking on the concrete, I thought about the journal in my backpack. She thinks legacy is what you buy. Julian thought this champagne made him important. He thought the black velvet curtains hiding the rust on the beams made him a CEO. He was just playing dress-up. I set the crate down in the VIP area, right next to the stage where he would give his speech tomorrow. Done, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. Julian walked over. He kicked the crate lightly with his expensive shoe. You missed a spot, he said, pointing to a smudge of dust on the floor near the crate. Clean it. I looked at him. The urge to reach into my bag, pull out the will, and end him right there was overwhelming. It burned in my chest like acid. But Sterling's voice echoed in my head. Let him believe he is a king. I knelt down. I pulled a rag from my back pocket. I wiped the floor. Good boy. Julian laughed. Maybe after I fire you, I'll keep you on as a shoe shine. He walked away, laughing. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. Enjoy the laugh, Julian, I thought. It's the last one you'll get. My shift ended at 8 p.m. I didn't go home. I had one more stop. The iron key Sterling gave me had a tag on it with an address. It wasn't the vault. It was a residential address on the Upper East Side. The penthouse. Silas Vanguard had kept a private residence separate from the estate he shared with Elena. Sterling said it had been locked since the day Silas died. Elena hated the place. She called it his man cave, so she never went there. I took the subway uptown. I felt out of place in my work clothes, grease still under my fingernails, carrying a backpack worth billions. The doorman at the building was an older gentleman. When I approached, he stepped out to block me. Deliveries are around the back, he said sternly. I'm not a delivery, I said. I pulled out the heavy iron key. The doorman stopped. He looked at the key, then at my face. His expression softened into shock. Mr. Silas's key, he whispered. He looked at me closely. You have his eyes. He stepped aside and held the door open. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't call up. He just pressed the button for the penthouse floor and nodded at me with a strange kind of reverence. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. It was dark inside. The air was stale, smelling of old leather and pipe tobacco. I found the light switch. The room that illuminated was magnificent, but not in the flashy way Julian liked. It was a library. Floor-to-ceiling books, a heavy oak desk, a leather armchair that looked worn in the shape of a man. I walked through the rooms. It felt like walking through a ghost story. There were schematics of the first Vanguard ships on the walls. There were photos of the warehouse when it was just a garage. I sat down at the massive oak desk. It faced a wall of windows overlooking the city. In the distance, I could see the blinking red lights of the Vanguard distribution center. He liked to watch the work. I tried the desk drawers, locked. I used the iron key. It fit the center drawer perfectly. Inside, there were no gold bars, no stocks, just a stack of letters, all addressed to Arthur, all returned to sender or never mailed, and a small silver picture frame face down. I turned it over. It was a Polaroid. A man with dark hair and a wide grin, Silas, 30 years younger, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The baby was reaching for his nose. On the white border of the photo, written in that jagged script, my Arthur. Day 1. My throat tightened. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't trash. I was loved. I sat there for a long time, holding the picture of the father I never knew, sitting in his chair, looking out at his empire. Elena had taken this from me. She had taken the weekends playing catch. She had taken the advice on how to shave. She had taken the father who would have taught me how to be a man, leaving me to learn it from the harshness of the world instead. She didn't just steal money, she stole time, and time is the one thing you can't buy back. I put the photo in my pocket, right next to the will. I looked out at the city lights. I saw the Vanguard logo glowing on top of the distant headquarters. It was time. I pulled out my phone. I opened the message thread with Mr. Sterling. I unzipped my backpack and placed the gray steel box on the oak desk. I took a picture of it sitting there, reclaiming its rightful place. I attached the photo to the message. I typed one word: execute. The morning sun hit the pavement outside the notary office with a glare that made my eyes water, or maybe that was just the lack of sleep. I hadn't slept since I found the picture in the penthouse. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling of my studio apartment, listening to the sirens outside, feeling the ghost of a father I never knew standing in the corner of the room. Mr. Sterling was waiting for me inside. The notary was a small, dusty shop sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a bodega, the kind of place that handled bail bonds and quick divorces. It was the last place anyone would look for the transfer of a billion-dollar empire. "Good morning, Arthur," Sterling said. He looked tired too, but his suit was crisp. He had a briefcase open on the scarred wooden desk. "Is it ready?" I asked. "It is." He slid a heavy stack of documents toward me. The paper was thick, expensive bond, assertion of heirship, petition to freeze assets, revocation of power of attorney. "This is the trigger," Sterling said, his voice low. "Once you sign this, and once we file it with the probate court, the clock stops. The banks will lock the Vanguard accounts immediately to prevent dissipation of assets during the dispute. Julian won't be able to buy a pack of gum with the company card." "When do we file?" "Tomorrow night," Sterling said. 8:30 p.m., right when Julian is scheduled to give his acceptance speech. The courts have an emergency electronic filing system. My paralegal is ready to hit submit the moment I give the signal. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than a wrench. "You understand what happens after this?" Sterling asked, putting a hand on my wrist. "There is no going back to the warehouse. There is no going back to anonymity. They will come for you with everything they have. The media, the lawyers, the private investigators. They will try to destroy your character because they can't destroy your DNA." "Let them try," I said. I signed my name, not the jagged scrawl I used on maintenance logs. I signed it carefully. Arthur Vanguard. The notary, a bored-looking woman with chewing gum, stamped it with a heavy thud. "It's done," Sterling said, placing the documents back in his briefcase. "Go to work. Be invisible for 24 more hours. I'll see you at the gala." Walking back into the warehouse felt like walking onto a movie set where I was the only one who had read the script. The transformation was nearly complete. The loading bay, usually a chaotic mess of forklifts and pallets, had been scrubbed clean. Black velvet curtains hung from the rafters, hiding the industrial grime. A massive stage had been erected where Line 1 usually stood. Julian was running around like a manic director, barking orders at the AV crew. "Testing 1, 2, his voice boomed over the PA system. "More bass. I want my voice to shake the floorboards." I grabbed my tool belt and headed for the back corridor, intending to check the HVAC units. If the air conditioning failed tomorrow with 500 people in tuxedos, Julian would probably try to execute me personally. "You there, maintenance." I froze. It wasn't Julian's voice. It was sharper, colder, a voice that sounded like ice cracking. I turned around. Elena Vanguard was standing near the entrance to the break room. I had seen her in photos. I had seen her on the news. But seeing her in person was different. She was in her late 50s, but surgery and money had frozen her face in a permanent expression of haughty youth. She wore a cream-colored suit that looked radiant against the gray concrete. She held a cup of coffee like it was a weapon. She was looking at me, but she wasn't seeing me. She was looking at a stain on her sleeve. "This is unacceptable," she hissed. I specifically asked for the floor to be leveled. I tripped. She hadn't tripped. The floor was perfectly level. I had resurfaced it myself 3 months ago. She was just clumsy, or perhaps nervous about the fraud she'd been maintaining for 20 years. She looked up and locked eyes with me. "You," she said. She snapped her fingers. Snap, snap. "Clean this up." She gestured to a small puddle of coffee she had spilled on the floor near her expensive heels. My blood ran cold. This was the woman who had forged my death certificate. This was the woman who had looked my father in the eye and lied so she could keep her status. She had stolen my childhood for a trust fund. I stood there for a second too long. "Are you deaf?" she asked, her voice raising an octave. I said, "Clean it up, before it stains the hem of my pants." I walked over slowly. I pulled a rag from my back pocket. I could have told her right then. I could have said, "Hello, Mother. I'm the ghost you created." But I didn't. I knelt down. I wiped the coffee from the concrete, inches from her shoes. I did it methodically, slow circles. Then I looked up. I didn't stand up immediately. I stayed on one knee, looking up at her face. For a moment, the arrogance in her eyes faltered. She frowned. She tilted her head slightly, looking at the shape of my nose, the set of my jaw. Her pupils dilated. Recognition is a primal thing. Even if you believe someone is dead, biology knows. She took a half step back, her hand going to her throat. Do I know you?" she whispered. Her voice trembled. The air between us was electric. She felt it. She felt the ghost. "Mom!" Julian's voice shattered the moment. He came jogging over, his phone pressed to his ear. "Mom, don't bother the help," he laughed, putting an arm around her shoulders. "You look like you've seen a phantom. What's wrong?" Elena blinked, and the mask slammed back into place. The fear vanished, replaced by her usual disdain. She looked from me to Julian, reassuring herself that her world was secure. "Nothing," she said, brushing visible dust off her jacket. "Just incompetence. It's startling." "Don't look at him too long," Julian sneered, glancing down at me, still kneeling on the floor. "You'll catch poverty." He laughed at his own joke. Elena forced a tight, thin smile. "Come on," Julian said, steering her away. "I need to show you the lighting for the reveal. It's going to be spectacular. When the spotlight hits me, the confetti cannons go off. It's going to cost $50,000 just for the confetti. Can you believe it?" "Is the trust transfer ready?" I heard Elena ask as they walked away. Yes, Julian waved his hand. "The lawyers have the papers. Once I give the speech, I sign the document, and the entire voting block is mine. It's a done deal." They disappeared behind the black velvet curtains. I stood up. My knees were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back. "It's a done deal," Julian had said. I looked at the spot where Elena had stood. "Not quite," I whispered. I finished my shift in a daze. I checked the AC units. I tightened the railings on the VIP stage. I essentially safety-checked the platform for my own executioners. At 5:00 p.m., I clocked out. I walked past the security desk where the guards were already setting up metal detectors for the gala. "Big night tomorrow, Arthur," one of the guards said. "You working security?" "Something like that," I said. I took the bus home. My apartment was quiet. I took a shower, scrubbing my skin until it was red, trying to wash off the feeling of being on my knees in front of Elena. I dried off and walked to the closet. Inside was a garment bag Sterling had given me. I unzipped it. It wasn't a tuxedo. That would have been too much. It was a dark navy suit, tailored, expensive. The kind of suit a CEO wears to a board meeting, not a party. I checked my bank account on my phone. Balance, $412. I checked the Vanguard Logistics stock price. It was trading at an all-time high in anticipation of the gala. Market cap, $94 billion. Technically, I was worth $94 billion. Practically, I barely had enough for rent. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Sarah, hey, just leaving the office." The atmosphere is weird. Julian is screaming at accounting because a vendor payment bounced. Apparently, he maxed out the operational credit line on party supplies. Thought you'd appreciate the irony. I smiled. He was spending money he didn't have to celebrate power he didn't own. I sat down at my small kitchen table. My laptop was open. I had connected it to a secure server Sterling had set up for me. The screen illuminated the dark room. A notification popped up in the corner. Document received, Vanguard, transfer, so control, final.pdf. I clicked print. The cheap inkjet printer on my desk whirred to life. It was a slow, rhythmic sound. Zist, zist. I watched the pages slide out into the tray. Page 1, Executive Summary. Page 5, Evidence of Fraudulent Conveyance. Page 12, DNA Paternity Test Results, Chain of Custody. Page 50, Immediate Removal of Executive Officers. The stack grew higher. It was just paper, fragile, combustible paper, but it was heavier than the gold bars in the vault. I picked up the stack, tapping the edges on the table to straighten them. I placed them in a leather portfolio Sterling had provided. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't look like a warehouse rat. I looked like Silas Vanguard. Tomorrow night the music would stop, the confetti would fall, and I would introduce myself to my family. The Grand Hotel ballroom smelled of expensive lilies and old money. It was the smell of a world I had been denied entry to since birth. I adjusted the cuff of my navy suit in the reflection of the lobby's brass doors. The suit fit perfectly. Sterling's tailor was a genius. But I still felt like an imposter in my own skin. For 10 years, my uniform had been gray coveralls and steel-toed boots. Now, looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger. Or maybe, for the first time, I was seeing the man Silas Vanguard intended me to be. I checked my pocket. The heavy iron key was there. So was the leather portfolio containing the signed documents. "Ticket, sir?" The security guard at the velvet rope was a man I recognized. It was Frank, the head of site security at the warehouse. He looked uncomfortable in his blazer, his eyes scanning the crowd for trouble. When he looked at me, his eyes widened. "Arthur?" he asked, blinking. "Is that you?" "Evening, Frank," I said. "You clean up good, kid," he muttered, glancing at his clipboard. "But I don't see your name on the guest list. This is VIP only, Julian's orders." "Check the supplemental list," I said, handing him a cream-colored envelope. Sarah had come through. She had slipped me a generic staff support invitation intended for the event coordinators. It wasn't a VIP pass, but it got you through the door. Frank scanned the QR code. The machine beeped green. "All right," Frank said, stepping aside. He lowered his voice. "Just stay out of Julian's line of sight, yeah? He's on a tear tonight, screaming at the waiters, screaming at the AV guys. He's nervous." "Thanks, Frank," I said. "I'll be invisible." I walked into the ballroom. It was spectacular. The ceilings were 30 feet high, draped in the same black velvet Julian had forced us to hang in the warehouse, creating a visual link between the grit of the business and the glamour of the profit. In the center of the room stood a massive ice sculpture of a Vanguard cargo ship, the same one I had watched melt in the back of a delivery truck yesterday while Julian yelled about timelines. Waiters circulated with trays of the Dom Perignon I had hauled. The room was filled with investors, board members, and city officials, 500 people who held the fate of the company in their hands. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and moved to the edge of the room near a marble pillar. I needed to wait for Sterling. The plan was precise. Sterling files the motion at 8:30 p.m. The banks freeze the accounts at 8:31 p.m. Julian takes the stage at 8:35 p.m. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. "You actually came." I turned. Sarah was standing there in a simple black dress, holding a glass of wine. She looked terrified. "You gave me the ticket," I said. "I didn't think you'd use it," she whispered, looking around nervously. "Arthur, Julian is looking for a reason to explode. If he sees you—" "Let him see me," I said calmly. "You're shaking," she noted. "I'm not shaking, Sarah. I'm vibrating." Just then, the music volume dipped. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. Near the main bar, a circle was forming. Laughter, loud, performative laughter, echoed off the high ceilings. I saw him. Julian was holding court. He was wearing a white dinner jacket that made him look like a waiter at a yacht club. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other, ignoring the hotel's no-smoking policy. Elena was beside him, looking less triumphant. She was typing furiously on her phone, her brow furrowed. Julian was telling a story. I caught fragments of it. "So I told the guy, if you can't fix a conveyor belt, maybe you should try fixing sandwiches at Subway." The sycophants around him roared with laughter. Then Julian turned. His eyes scanned the room, looking for his next audience member. His gaze swept past the pillar. Then it snapped back. He stopped laughing. He squinted. He took a step forward, pushing a board member out of his way. "No way," he said, loud enough to carry. The crowd quieted down, following his gaze. Julian walked toward me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. He had a smile on his face, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of a predator finding a wounded animal in its territory. "Well, well, well," Julian announced, his voice booming. "Look who decided to crash the party." Sarah took a step back, instinctively distancing herself from the blast radius. I didn't move. I took a sip of water. Julian stopped 3 feet from me. He looked me up and down, taking in the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the calm demeanor. For a second, he looked confused. The rat wasn't supposed to look like this. "Who dressed you, Arthur?" Julian asked, turning to address the room. "Did you rob a funeral home, or is that a rental? Be careful with the champagne, everyone. If he spills it, he can't afford the cleaning bill." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. These people didn't know me. They just knew the CEO was making a joke, and the polite thing to do was laugh. I'm just here to celebrate the company's success, Julian, I said. My voice was steady. I helped build it, after all. You helped build it, Julian repeated, incredulous. He turned to Elena, who had followed him over. Did you hear that, Mother? The janitor thinks he built Vanguard. Elena didn't laugh. She was looking at me with that same expression she'd had in the warehouse, fear. She was looking at the suit. She was realizing that maintenance workers don't buy suits like this. She leaned in to whisper to Julian. Leave it alone, Julian. Let's go to the stage. No, Julian said, shaking her off. He was enjoying this too much. He wanted to assert dominance one last time before his coronation. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. Let me be clear, Julian said, his voice dropping to a menacing register. You are here because of a clerical error. You are a stain on this evening. I'm going to let you stay for exactly 10 minutes. Why? Because I want you to see what real success looks like. I want you to watch me sign the papers that make me the owner of everything you spend your miserable life cleaning. He poked me in the chest, hard. And then, he grinned, I'm going to have Frank throw you into the alley where you belong. Enjoy the hors d'oeuvres, rat. He turned his back on me. Music, he shouted at the DJ. Turn it up, we're celebrating. The music swelled. The crowd dispersed, returning to their drinks. Julian headed toward the stage, high-fiving a few investors, but Elena stayed behind for a moment. She stood there, staring at me. She took a step closer. Who are you working with? She hissed. Is it the union? Are you trying to blackmail us? I looked down at her. I'm not in a union, Mrs. Vanguard. She glared at me, searching for a threat she could understand. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Her face went pale beneath her makeup. What do you mean, insufficient funds? She muttered to herself. She tapped the screen frantically. Try the reserve account. She looked up at me, panic flaring in her eyes. She sensed the walls closing in, but she didn't know where the attack was coming from. If you ruin this night, she threatened, I will make sure you never work in this city again. You should go, I said simply. Julian is waiting. She scoffed and hurried away, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I checked my watch. 8:31 p.m. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Sterling. Sterling, the motion is filed. The freezing order was just executed by the bank. They are locked out. I am in the AV booth. I looked up at the balcony overlooking the ballroom. In the darkened glass of the control booth, I saw a silhouette raise a hand. The trap was sprung. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage. The music faded into a dramatic drum roll. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed, please welcome the future of global logistics, the new chairman and CEO of Vanguard, Julian Vanguard. Thunderous applause. Julian bounded onto the stage, arms raised in victory. He looked invincible. He looked like a man who owned the world. He didn't notice that the catering staff had stopped serving. He didn't notice that the bar manager was on the phone, looking confused, holding a credit card reader that was flashing red. He didn't notice his mother frantically waving at him from the side of the stage, mouthing, "Stop." Julian walked to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out over the sea of faces, 500 people who admired him, feared him, or wanted his money. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed he had won the game of life simply by being born. He looked directly at me, standing in the shadows by the pillar. He winked. Julian stepped onto the main stage, tapped the microphone, and said, "Tonight, the Vanguard legacy officially becomes mine." Tonight, the Vanguard legacy officially becomes mine. Julian's voice echoed through the ballroom, amplified by $100,000 worth of sound equipment. He raised his glass. The crowd raised theirs, a sea of tuxedos and diamonds toasting to a lie. For 30 years, my father built this company, Julian continued, his chest puffing out. And for the next 30, I will... Screech. A high-pitched blast of audio feedback tore through the room. Guests flinched, covering their ears. Glasses shattered on trays. Julian winced and glared at the sound booth balcony. Cut the feed. Who is running this? The massive LED screen behind him, which had been displaying a 10-foot-tall portrait of Julian's face, flickered. It went black for a second. Then it illuminated again. But it wasn't Julian's face. It was a document, a stark black-and-white PDF scan. The header was legible even from the back of the room, Cook County Coroner's Office, Certificate of Death. The name on the certificate was highlighted in yellow, Arthur Penhaligon. The date was from 15 years ago, and at the bottom, the signature of the witness who identified the body, Elena Vanguard. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People squinted. Whispers started. Who is Arthur? Is that a death certificate? Elena, standing at the foot of the stairs, froze. Her face, usually a mask of composed vanity, crumbled into pure, unadulterated terror. She dropped her clutch. "Turn it off," Julian screamed, waving his arms at the booth. "We have been hacked! Security, cut the power!" "The power stays on," a voice boomed. It wasn't Julian's voice. It came from the side of the stage. Archibald Sterling walked out from the wings. He moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but he commanded the room with the gravity of a judge. He walked right up to Julian. "Get off my stage, you senile old bat," Julian hissed, covering his microphone, though the audio caught it anyway. "I'll have you disbarred." "You can try," Sterling said calmly into his own handheld mic. "But as of 8:31 p.m. tonight, the board of directors has been dissolved. The bylaws of the Vanguard Trust are clear. In the event of the discovery of the primary heir, all executive powers revert immediately to the bloodline." Julian laughed. It was a manic, desperate sound. "Primary heir? I am the bloodline. I am the only son." "No," Sterling said. "You are the second son." He pointed to the back of the room. "Arthur, if you please." The spotlight that had been fixed on Julian swiveled. It cut through the darkness and landed on me. For a second, I was blinded. I blinked, my heart hammering against my ribs like a fist. But then I felt the iron key in my pocket. I felt the weight of the journal in my bag. I wasn't just Arthur, the maintenance guy. I was the man in the Polaroid. I started walking. The crowd parted instantly. This wasn't the polite spacing they gave a waiter. This was the wide berth you give a predator or a king. "Him?" Julian shouted, pointing at me as I walked down the center aisle. "The janitor. This is a joke. This is a sick joke." He looked at the security guards lining the stage. Frank, get him. Throw him out. That's a direct order." Frank looked at Julian. Then he looked at me. He looked at the document still projected on the giant screen. Proof of a crime. Frank folded his arms across his chest and stepped back. "Sorry, Mr. Vanguard. I answer to the owner." I walked up the stairs onto the stage. The wood creaked under my boots. The same boots I wore to fix the hydraulic lifts, now polished to a shine. I stood next to Julian. Up close, he looked smaller. He was sweating profusely, his foundation running in streaks down his collar. "Get away from me," Julian whispered, backing up until he hit the podium. "You're a rat. You're nothing." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the remote clicker Sterling had given me. I pointed it at the screen. The image changed. Now it showed the DNA test results. Silas Vanguard. Shared DNA, 49.9%. Parent. "My name is Arthur Vanguard," I said. My voice didn't shake. It boomed through the speakers, filling the room, bouncing off the ice sculpture and the velvet curtains. "And for 15 years, your mother lied to my father. She told him I was dead, so you could inherit a chair you don't know how to sit in." I clicked the remote again. A new document appeared. A bank transfer record. Millions of dollars moved from company accounts to a shell corporation in the Caymans. The consulting fee for the forgery. "That's a lie," Elena shrieked. She tried to rush the stage, but 2 uniformed police officers stepped out from the wings. They had been waiting. "Elena Vanguard," one of the officers said, grabbing her wrist as she tried to slap him. "You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement." The crowd gasped. Phones were out everywhere, recording the downfall of a dynasty in 4K resolution. Julian looked at his mother being handcuffed. He looked at the screen. He looked at me. The reality was finally piercing his narcissism. "You can't do this," he stammered. "The company. The gala. I spent millions." "You spent the company's money," I corrected him. "My money." I took a step closer to him. The same distance he had stood from me in the warehouse when he threatened to fire me. "You called me a burden, Julian. You said I was an expensive mistake. You told me you were going to cut the fat on Monday." Julian was trembling now. "Arthur, listen. We're family. We can work this out. I can run operations. You don't know how to run a company. You fix conveyor belts." "I fix the things you break," I said. "And you've broken enough." I looked out at the silent crowd. I saw Sarah standing near the pillar, a hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. I nodded to her. Then I turned back to Julian. "You're right about one thing," I said softly. "Changes are coming. I'm restructuring, starting at the top." I pointed to the exit. "You're fired." Julian opened his mouth to argue, but the sound died in his throat. He looked at the crowd, desperate for an ally, for someone to laugh at the janitor's joke. But no one was laughing. They were looking at him with the cold detachment of people who bet on the wrong horse. "Escort him out," I said to Frank. Frank stepped forward, grabbed Julian by the arm, not gently, and steered him toward the side stairs. "Don't touch me! Do you know who I am?" Julian screamed, thrashing as he was dragged away. "I am Vanguard. I am Vanguard." His voice faded as the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. Silence descended on the ballroom. 500 people held their breath, waiting to see what the man in the navy suit would do next. I looked at the microphone. I looked at the ice sculpture melting in the center of the room. I looked at the black velvet curtains. "The party is over," I said into the mic. "Go home." It took 10 minutes for the room to clear. The investors fled like roaches when the lights turned on. The board members tried to approach me, offering handshakes and apologies, but Sterling intercepted them with a wave of his cane. "Appointments only," he barked. "Monday morning." When the room was finally empty, save for the catering staff cleaning up the untouched champagne, I sat down on the edge of the stage. My legs felt heavy. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Sarah walked up to the stage. She took off her heels and sat down next to me, her feet dangling over the edge. "So," she said, looking at the empty ballroom, "that happened." "Yeah," I said. "That happened." "What now?" she asked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy iron key. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling the rust and the history. "Now," I said, "I go back to the warehouse." "To work?" she asked, surprised. "To apologize," I said. "To the guys Julian fired. To the shift managers he bullied. I'm going to hire them back. And then, I'm going to learn how to run this place properly. Not from a glass office, from the floor." Sterling walked over, closing his briefcase with a satisfying snap. "The police have taken Elena into custody," he reported. "Bail will be denied given the flight risk, and the assets are secure. You are officially the majority shareholder, Arthur." He looked at me, a rare smile touching his lips. "Your father would have enjoyed that speech." I looked up at the giant screen, now blank and dark. I thought about the Polaroid in my pocket. The man with the wide grin. "I hope so," I said. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. Come on," I said to Sarah and Sterling. "Let's get out of here. I know a diner that serves terrible coffee. I'm buying." We walked out of the hotel, past the confused valet, and into the cool night air. The city lights were bright, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was looking at them from the outside. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was Arthur Vanguard, and I had a lot of work to do.